So sweet. I love Thanksgiving. Don't you?
Yeah.
I just love it. And yet, you know, we really ought to have Thanksgiving as a permanent state.
Yes.
And sometimes it's difficult. And as lovely as we know this world is, sometimes it doesn't reflect that back to us. So I think it's especially important right now, this year, to take a look and recognize that that's the truth. It is indeed a wonderful world. Our theme this month is financial health and prosperity. And of course, when we say prosperity, we don't just mean prosperity and money. We mean prosperity, abundance, and all the goodness God offers us in all areas of our lives. So whether it's rich, loving, fulfilling, harmonious relationships, vibrant, vital health, and wholeness and vitality, whether it's fulfilling self-expression in our lives, or abundance of material goods as well. All of that is indeed God's good pleasure to give us as the kingdom of God. We're talking about this book of the month, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist, and she talks about 3 truths about sufficiency. So we're going to continue that today. Last week I talked about the difference between a scarcity mentality, when we live out of lack and fear of not enough, and knowing the truth that we do indeed live in a wonderful world, an abundant world. That is constantly the truth. In Science of Mind, in fact, we know that spirit exists everywhere. Everywhere. That good exists everywhere. And that one of the aspects of spirit, in addition to universal mind that is creative, that created this beautiful world, another aspect of spirit is the creative medium out of which everything is born, including you and me. That law, as we call it in Science of Mind, that law that always responds to our prayers, to our intentions, to what we focus on. And that unformed substance is limitless. It can produce anything. It just waits for either universal mind, spirit, to create, or for us with our individualized part of that universal mind to tap into it. And it responds and it can form whatever good we are desiring. It's limitless. It's absolutely infinite. So good to remember that. Last week I told 2 stories that I'll summarize very briefly today. Lynn Twist, the author of The Soul of Money, was a fundraiser for the Hunger Project. And in one single day, she had 2 very different experiences. Traveling to Chicago to visit the CEO of a very wealthy, enormous food company who was in trouble with their image. They had a bad PR problem because they had made some very, let's say, unsavory decisions, and thought it might look good if they gave a donation to the Hunger Project. So at the end of her 15 minutes meeting with this man, he handed her a check he had already pre-printed for $50,000. And she left there feeling kind of dirty, like he had handed her her shame and guilt. Off she went on a plane to New York, to Harlem, where she had agreed to do a fundraiser for a group of people at a black church. Poor building, it was raining and it was leaking, and she met in the basement with these folks, and afterwards, this beautiful woman named Gertrude came up and handed Lynn a pile of 1s, 5s, and $10 bills. She said to her, I don't have any credit cards, I don't have a checkbook, but I like you and I like what you're doing, and I want to put my money where I know it will do the most good for the most people. And almost everyone in the room came up after that and did the same thing. 1s, 5s, 10s in cash. They lay in the briefcase on top of that $50,000 check, and Lynn was moved to tears. Because that money, she said, was even more powerfully going to help eliminate poverty and world hunger, because it was ensouled. It was filled with the soul and the intention of those people who didn't have a lot, but knew that they were the stewards of what they did have. And that's where the talk title came from last week. Money is like water. Gertrude told Lynn that money is like water. Some people experience torrents of it in their life, like that CEO. And some of us, like me, experience it more like a trickle. But the fact is, we're all in that flow, and we all have the power to decide what we do with what we're given. So today, the talk title comes from another chapter in Lynn's book, What We Appreciate Appreciates. I wanted to read you a quote from our founder of Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes. He talks about how spirit is everywhere present. And since spirit is both receptivity and creative responsiveness, sometimes we say spirit receives the impress of our thoughts and then acts upon them. It follows that wherever we center our attention, its image must concentrate substance into the form of such intention. That's the power that we have at our fingertips. I ran across a quote this week that had a very powerful effect on me right now. I found it on the website for the organization for which Lynn Twist now works, which is called Pachamama. They're an alliance of folks that have worked with the Achuar people, the indigenous people in the rainforests in, I believe it's Ecuador and Peru in South America. And their goal is to preserve the rainforest and also to train people about the sustainable practices that we all can be using to preserve our earth. The quote is by Albert Einstein, who said this: "I think the most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or a hostile universe." Oh, that hit me this week. Oh. What do we believe? Do we believe we live in a friendly or a hostile universe? I know that right now in these times, in this country, and really around the world, it's easy to believe it's a hostile universe. We live in a country that is bitterly divided politically. We live in a country where the distance between what those who don't have and those who do have economically is growing, that divide. We live in a country where we seem to see mass shootings almost every week. And a world which suffers all kinds of war, famine, and so on, terrorism. So it's easy to start to think, isn't it, that it's a hostile world. But we get to choose. We get to choose not only how we think about our money, scarcity versus abundance or sufficiency, but we get to choose to remember God is everywhere present. God is good. Each of us, no matter whether we agree with each other or not, whether we're acting godly or not, is an individualized expression of the goodness, the love, the peace, the harmony that Spirit is. And the power in remembering that, even especially when times make it difficult to remember that. Remember, what we appreciate appreciates. We have the power to change the world. But we need to focus and refocus constantly on that truth of goodness, of God's presence everywhere. The other thing I talked about last week, kind of backing up a little bit, is Lynn Twist's concept of sufficiency. So yes, we live in an abundant universe, and that unforeign substance can give us anything we pray for. And if we're truly going to create a world that works for everyone, we need to think about the concept of sufficiency. What is enough? I love the Lord's Prayer. There's a line in there, "Give us this day our daily bread." It doesn't say, "Give us everything we need for the rest of our lives." Give us this day our daily bread. So as we look at our own lives and appreciate what's here right now, I would venture to say that all of us have a roof over our head, I hope, food to eat for this day, people that we love. For right now, all is well. We have everything we need. And so like Gertrude, the lady who brought her money up to Lynn at that Harlem church, we also get to look at what is enough for me and what do I have that I want to share to help make it work for everybody in the world, which is part of what we're doing right now with the Northwest Seasonal Workers Association. So my title today again is What We Appreciate. What you appreciate appreciates. Lynn says this is true in our money culture. If we purchase a home in a desirable neighborhood, chances are, as time goes by, it appreciates. It's true in our personal relationships. Do you ever see what happens when you truly appreciate somebody? Whether it's an acquaintance or somebody you love, they kind of bloom, don't they? They glow and they bloom and they become more of that. It's true of business, a company's commitment to their employees if they appreciate them, both in terms of verbal praise and encouragement and in monetary compensation. Those employees become motivated and committed and produce better and more creativity happens. By the way, we begin our board meeting here at CSLRV every month with an appreciation practice. We come up with some way each month to appreciate, sometimes ourselves, but most of the time each other. And it sets the tone for our meeting. It sets a tone of oneness and togetherness and goodness, and it's quite lovely. There's even a practice now called appreciative inquiry, which research has shown in business works. So businesses are encouraged to focus on not solving problems, but on what works, what's working, what are the resources we have. It's a very, very effective process. So again, we have the power to direct our attention, whether it's in any area of our lives, but for right now we are talking about our financial life. It's a powerful, intentional practice to focus on the resources, the good, what's working. If we focus on jealousy, envy, resentment, she has this and I don't get it, or vengeance, being angry at somebody, we become jealous, envious, resentful, and vengeful with our money. And that's not a whole lot of fun. So, no matter how much money we have, focusing on what we do have. Because you know what, even people who are wealthy, the author points out, sometimes get into this scarcity mentality of how can I hang on to it? A fear of controlling and a lack mentality. It doesn't even really matter how much money we have. We get to choose. Focus on what we have, the goodness, knowing that we live in a friendly universe, or focusing on lack and scarcity. Lynn Twist says she learned this principle from some of the poorest people in the world. And I'm going to tell you one story today. It's the story of a country called Bangladesh. It's a country in Asia with 180 million people in a landmass the size of our state of Iowa. It was once thriving in many ways, with rainforests and vegetation and people who had a beautiful culture. And back in the 1900s, it became ravaged by outside interests who destroyed the rainforest and the vegetation. There were wars, and the country was really decimated and just broken. Its spirit was broken. By the 1970s, Bangladesh was declared the second poorest country in the world. And the people experienced floods, and when the floods, which were common for that area, when the floods came without the vegetation to contain the floods, the devastation was even worse. So a new flood happened in the country, which was a flood of foreign aid. But the result was to break the spirits of the people who came to feel dependent and not looking at their resources and the fact that they still had strengths, but, oh my gosh, we need help. In the villages, the young people turned to crime, or families considered moving because there was no resource within the town. It was really, really a very, very dire situation. Now, there were groups helping out. There were people from the outside there trying to help. The Hunger Project was one of them. There were also indigenous groups that were helping, and they seemed to be really the most effective ones. There was a bank that gave out microloans and another organization doing community development. The Hunger Project decided to meet with the people, because that's the way they do it. They collaborate. They don't install policies. And they met with the leaders to talk about what could be done. And they came up with this beautiful system that's akin to our visioning process. I know a lot of you have done that. So I think it was called the Vision, Commitment, and Action Workshop they devised. So it consisted of meeting with people. Well, let me tell you the story of the first one. It was the capital city of Dhaka in Bangladesh. There's a big city park, but it was a park without anything green at this point. It could hold more than 1,000 people. And because the people weren't really engaged and employed, when they called a meeting, a lot of people came, hundreds and then thousands. And this first workshop, they began with some song and a little speech by the community leaders. And then they led them in a process to look at what vision they could have of Bangladesh as a self-sufficient, self-reliant country. So people closed their eyes, and they were asked to think about what would it look like if Bangladesh were exporting its beautiful goods across the world and blessing the world. What would it look like if men and women and children were gainfully employed and contributing to society? What would it look like if the poetry and music and writing of Bangladesh was being spread across the world? What would it look like? And at first people were silent with their eyes closed. And Lynn said then she noticed tears running down the face of one man, and then another, and then tens and 20s. And there were literally hundreds of people silently with closed eyes weeping because they glimpsed a vision of something greater, of a future that was good and rich and fulfilling. The next step in the workshop was to let people share the visions that came, visions for their family, for their community, for the world, for their country. And they were asked to commit to take action. And this is much like what the social artistry groups from Jean Houston do, if any of you have been involved in that. Highly recommend that this summer. But it's the same process. It's having a vision, making a commitment to taking a step, because as we've said before in here, we can't do it all. We can't all save everything and everyone, but we can all do a piece. So we meet in groups with people, collaborate, commit to a project. Well, here's what happened. There's a small town called Sylhet, and it too had been devastated, although it was high enough it wasn't really affected by the floods. But most of the land in this village had become overgrown with brambles, with poisonous berries, and so thick it was dangerous you couldn't even walk in it. The government had declared it off limits. And the government had allowed the villagers certain small plots to farm. But the brambles and the mess was encroaching on that, and it was not working. A man named Zilu happened to be in Dhaka, when one of these workshops was going on, and he really didn't want to go. He was in Dhaka to visit his cousin, to ask his cousin if the family could move in with them because they weren't surviving in the little village they came from in Sylhet. But his cousin convinced him to go to the workshop, and he was enthralled. And for the next 3 days, he attended the training for leaders. He went back to Sylhet. He recruited 6 of his closest male friends, who became what Lynn Twist calls the Magnificent Seven. Here's what they did. First, they got permission from the government to clear 17 acres of that brambled mess. Then they collected money from people who didn't have a lot, but they contributed for equipment and so on. And people began to get engaged. And then the government gave them permission to clear 100 acres. And as part of that, they discovered this beautiful lake that had been hidden, teeming with fish. They built a road, and the village began to be self-sufficient, to be farming and engaged, and people weren't moving away anymore. It was an amazing, amazing experience. And Lynn writes this. I thought I would read it to you because it was so beautiful. So now these folks are feeling powerful, creative, no longer reliant on someone else. They had once lost touch with their resources, but now they appreciate it. They had everything they needed there all the time to do this. They just didn't see it. They hadn't been able to appreciate it. Lynn writes this. Looking at the fields, once impenetrable jungle and brush, I thought about our own lives, and I encourage you to do this. Every story is powerful if we think about, how do we fit in this story? How does this apply to me? I thought about our own lives and that which covers over the soil of our dreams, that which temporarily blocks our inner vision or capacity to see. In their world, it was the jungle and the confusing message of aid telling them they were incomplete and needy and not able to make it on their own. They had bought into that, and as long as they did, they couldn't see the resources in front of them. Once they focused their attention on their own unlimited inner resources, the outer resources materialized, suddenly accessible. They could begin to see that what they needed had been there all along. Lynn says, I never forgot the Magnificent Seven. When you're crushed by the victim mentality as they were, your ability to dream and envision is crushed too. It goes dead. Anybody here feeling a little crushed by victim mentality? I know I am sometimes. When I find myself groping for what's beyond my grasp, I hear their words in my head and know that if I can re-look from the inside out and access and appreciate what's already there, what's already available, then its power, utility, and grace will grow and prosper in the nourishment of my attention. So I'm asking us this week to think about how we might apply these principles. How we might apply looking at what's already here. What goodness, what strengths, what talents, what connections we already have, that we might make the changes we feel need to be made in this country and in this world. Step by step, small group by small group, What is mine to do? And who might I partner with? And what's the first step I might take? It applies to our country, to the world, and also to our personal lives, to our finances, to our goodness. We are powerful beyond measure. We forget. We forget that we indeed live in a friendly universe, not a hostile one. So back to that idea of appreciative inquiry. Not thinking about solving problems, but appreciating what's already here. Searching for the best in people, in organizations, in the world. Looking for what's working instead of what's not. It's so easy for me, and I bet for everybody here, to focus on what's not working right now. But what's working? That's why I love, I've mentioned before, websites like Upworthy.com, where you see the good that's happening. The news doesn't cover it, but it's happening. So instead of negation, criticism, and spiraling diagnosis, there's discovery, dream, design. Yeah. And so this month of Thanksgiving, let's take a look at what we appreciate, what we're grateful for in our finances, in our relationships, in our health, experiencing the bounty that's available right now. Let's vision together and individually what's possible, and then make a commitment to act. I'd like to leave you with a couple thoughts. One is a little game you might play over Thanksgiving dinner this year that Lynn Twist suggests on the website. It's a game of appreciation. So you write a list of everybody that's going to be around the table. And you make each person a copy of that list, probably in slips of paper. So if I had Eddie and Jill and Tom there, I'd receive a piece of paper with each of their names and my own name. Everybody get a slip of paper with everybody else's name. And each person is asked to write one appreciation for each person there. Even if they don't know each other, we can always find something to appreciate if we first met somebody. And then you distribute those slips of paper back to the people so they can read their appreciations. And I would add another step if I were doing it, and I plan to. I would have people talk about one thing that they're especially moved by that they received. One, perhaps, sometimes people recognize things in us that we didn't know were visible or we didn't even know existed. A way to appreciate those attending. I'd like to read another quote as I close up here from our founder, Ernest Holmes. He said, "In everything give thanks. An attitude of gratitude is most salutary, beneficial, and bespeaks the realization that we are now in heaven. How we love to do for those who cooperate with and are grateful for our small endeavors. And so does spirit appreciate appreciation. Gratitude is one of the chief graces of human existence and is crowned in heaven with a consciousness of unity." The most important decision we make is whether we live in a friendly or a hostile universe. Let's remember to give thanks, to plug into the good, to collaborate with others, so that we can truly create not only a life that works for me, but a world that works for